Hey everyone, welcome to the end of week 3. This week we've been looking at biopsychology. I hope that you've had an exciting time as you've gone through the materials and explored how your biology actually starts to impact and influence your psychology. Some of the major concepts from this week include, of course, what is biopsychology, and then breaks down into the elements of really how the body functions, including neurons and neurotransmitters, the nervous system, the endocrine system, and then finally the brain. So we're going to take a look at each of these just for a moment to recap some important things that you should know and make sure that you're aware and ready to move on in your understanding of psychology. So if we start with just the basics of what biopsychology is, it's really just the study of how our biology influences our behavior. So we use neuroscience, psychology, biology to understand things like the nervous system, the brain, genetics, heredity, and how those together influence and encourage our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, everything that is associated with our human functioning. But to understand that, we have to go down to the very basic level, which is the neuron. And the neuron is really the building block of the nervous system. It's how the whole body communicates. It's an electrochemical system, which means that chemicals are released that convert into an electrical signal. So we do actually produce our own electricity. And that system is a very fast system in communication. And it's designed that way to allow us to do things like talk and think and move and walk and play sports and instruments and all the things that we do as humankind. Now, the way it does this is through these chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, and there's quite a bit of them, and each of them has a specialized purpose. For example, if you look at the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, it's involved in learning, memory, muscle movement. If you look at dopamine, we see things like pleasure, or serotonin, which is things like mood, and endorphins, which deal with like our euphoria, and it's also a pain reliever. It actually stands for endogenous morphine. So each of these neurotransmitters has a specific purpose, and when there's a deficiency or an overabundance of them, that often will result in some type of biological disorder, which can actually be expressed psychologically. So, for example, an undersupply of serotonin is linked to things like depression. And when we don't have enough serotonin, we may experience symptoms of depression. So while the body is actually creating the problem, we are experiencing it on a psychological level as well. With that, we're going to move on to the nervous system, and we're going to look at how that's broken down. We're just going to focus on a couple parts of it. First, there are two major divisions of the nervous system that you should have been aware of: the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Think about it as running down the center of your body, your brain and your spinal cord, and that then communicates with the rest of the body through the peripheral nervous system, which is everything outside of the brain and spinal cord. And that peripheral nervous system is where we're going to spend a minute because it breaks down a little bit further into a couple divisions, and we're going to look at the autonomic and the somatic. So somatic meaning body, or soma meaning body, right? So how our body functions and operates allows our brain to communicate with our body, our limbs, and everything. But really I want to focus on the autonomic nervous system, because it breaks down a little bit further to our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous systems. And our sympathetic nervous system, if you think about it in terms of, it expresses sympathy for us. So it is sympathetic to what is going on. If we're excited, if we're sad, if we're angry, if we're scared, it responds, and things like your heart rate increases and your palms become sweaty, your pupils dilate, you might feel like throwing up. All these things happen in response to whatever form of arousal is taking place. Now, our body responds pretty much the same way all the time, but it's our mind that determines why it's happening. So we get to decide whether it's because we're scared, we're excited, that is happening. Now, on the opposite side of that is the parasympathetic nervous system, and its job is to calm us down, to return us to homeostasis. And so it does that just by bringing us back down to our normal level of functioning, reducing all those things like reducing our heart rate and our sweating, allows us to eat and to function properly and not feel sick to our stomach. So the whole system is set up pretty perfectly to help us function and alert us when things are not right. And then we are designed to then help us bring ourselves back into the normal level of functioning or homeostasis. If we move on from there, we have the other body's chemical system, which is the endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system is a lot slower, and it deals with hormones. So if the nervous system and neurotransmitters are like sending a text, this would be like getting a letter in the mail. It's really slow, which means that the slower build, the slower return. So if you ever wondered why maybe after a major event why you still feel the effects of it for a little while, it's probably because the hormones in the body haven't dissipated enough for that effect to be mitigated. And so it might take a little while for them to get going, but once they get going, they definitely have a lasting effect, and it lasts for quite a bit of time. Now, these are secreted through a system of glands. You have the pituitary gland, which is, of course, the master gland of the body, and it's in the brain. And then you have other glands that work in conjunction with it throughout the body to control different aspects of our functioning, such as the adrenal glands, which release adrenaline and noradrenaline. You have the ovaries and testes, which release testosterone and estrogen. And you have other glands like your thyroid and your parathyroid, which work on calcium and the thyroxine hormone. And all of these are designed to help your body function effectively. And so when these get out of whack or get unbalanced, then we often will experience not only physiological symptoms, but psychological symptoms as well. Maybe things like moodiness or anger, depression, and any of the likes of psychological disorders that can be associated with just a simple hormonal imbalance. And so by regulating these hormones effectively, we can bring our bodies back into balance, which actually brings our minds back into balance and helps level out our psychological functioning. Now, lastly, we have the brain, which is a huge part of our biopsychology as well. And there's multiple parts. It's divided into 4 lobes. Each lobe has a specialized function, as well as all the little mini parts in the brain have some specialized functions as well. And one thing interesting about the brain is that it's contralateral, meaning that it controls the opposite side from where it's at. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. And it's all connected through this fibrous tissue in the brain called the corpus callosum. And in some patients with severe seizures, they've actually done things like sever that, and they call that the split brain procedure. And so the 2 hemispheres of the brain no longer communicate. And so it's some quite interesting research there on seeing, can we function when those 2 hemispheres of the brain don't communicate? And we can. And in fact, those individuals function almost as normal as the rest of us, but maybe with a couple key differences, such as they might be able to draw 2 images at once. Sometimes they can see something and say what it is, and sometimes they can see something and not say what it is, but may be able to point to it. So all of these different things are associated with that functioning. And of course, you can imagine when that takes place, how that affects our understanding of how specialized each hemisphere and each specific part of the brain really is. So while we don't have time to go into all the brain parts today, I encourage you to take a study of each part and make sure you know that its form and its function, so that you can determine when those parts are struggling, or when there's damage to those parts, what might come from that. So thanks for joining me today for this quick recap. I hope that you learned a lot and kind of got the big ideas from this week's learning, and I look forward to seeing you next week.